Could obesity help you become a criminal mastermind? One of the weirdest death row stories ever might just prove that to be the case. Mitchell Rupe was born in Washington in the USA in 1955. His early life is shrouded in mystery, but he spent time in the Army, and by 1981 he landed a job as a security guard at Olympia Technical Community College in Olympia, Washington. It's impossible to say why, on September 17, 1981, Rupe decided to rob Tumwater State Bank. But it wasn't his first attempt. He tried to do this before, just 2 days earlier, but he had chickened out. But on the morning of the 17th, everything shifted. After wandering the campus for a bit and grabbing a breakfast at the nearby cafe, he hitched a ride to the bank. Inside his green satchel was a .357 Colt Trooper. He walked through the doors, pulled the gun, and robbed the place. Rupe escaped with $4,000, but in the process, he shot 2 bank tellers, Twyla Capron and Candace Hemming, at point-blank range, killing them both. Capron's husband, who arrived at the bank shortly after, discovered the grisly scene and called 911. One thing about Michael Rupe: he wasn't exactly a criminal mastermind, at least according to a key witness, Monty Jovicic, the friend who had given him the ride. The two were classmates at Olympia Technical Community College, and on the morning of the robbery, Jovicic dropped Rupe off near the Tumwater State Bank without thinking much of it. The next time he saw him, Rupe flat out confessed that he had just robbed the place. Not only that, Rupe had stashed the cash and the gun in Jovicic's garage. Jovicic was understandably pretty freaked out and immediately called a friend, Marlon Townsend, to come over and scour the garage for the incriminating items. They found the bag and the gun, got into Townsend's car, and drove out to the nearby Grapeview to hide it. This seemed like a good enough solution, and they went home, presumably vowing to never speak of this again. But later that night, they were both overcome by paranoia. What if the other guy went back for the cash? What if he took the gun to the cops and ratted him out for a crime he didn't even commit? Unable to sleep with those big questions hanging over them, Townsend and Jovicic both went back to Grapeview, and when they were both there, they agreed that maybe this wasn't the best course of action. The two men went over to a home of a third friend, Carl Skip Grosskopf, who'd agreed to stash the gun until this all blew over. When Grosskopf later testified in court, he recalled noticing that the revolver looked like it had been fired recently, but at the time he apparently didn't think that detail was worth mentioning. Townsend and Jovicic weren't aware that Rupe had killed 2 people in the course of the robbery until later. That evening, Townsend's parents mentioned a newspaper story that they had seen. 2 tellers had been shot and killed in a robbery at Tumwater State Bank. Right after dinner, Townsend and Jovicic went back to Grosskopf's place. They grabbed the gun and they tossed the weapon off of a nearby bridge. Grosskopf reportedly asked why they needed it back so quickly. Jovicic replied, "You don't want to know." They even split what was left of the loot between themselves. By the time the police recovered the bag, only about $2,100 was still inside. All of that scrambling to hide the cash and dump the gun turned out to be pointless anyway, because Mitchell Rupe wasn't trying to cover his tracks. He actually was pretty nonchalant about the whole thing. Instead of getting out of Dodge like you would expect, he went back to the bank and he stuck around while the police searched for clues. When the police asked what he was doing, he straight up told them he had been at the bank that morning. When he was questioned later, he confessed to committing the robbery and the murders. Law enforcement found his checkbook at the scene, and when they searched Rupe's car, they found the same ammunition used in the shootings. Even though he initially confessed, he changed his tune during the trial when it took place in 1982. He started claiming that Monty Jovicic had framed him and was the real culprit. According to Rupe, he and Jovicic had talked about robbing the bank on the 15th, but Rupe handed the green satchel and the gun to Jovicic after chickening out. And while he was in the bank, Jovicic came back on a motorcycle carrying the satchel and the gun. Rupe ran to his truck, terrified that his friend was going to start shooting people. And according to this story, both Twyla Capron and Candace Hemming were still alive when he fled. He'd only confessed to the crime, he said, because he felt responsible. If he hadn't given Jovicic the gun, the senseless act of violence might not have happened. Why he didn't just turn in Jovicic as well, if this whole moronic story were actually true, was just one more plot hole in what was already a block of Swiss cheese logic. Rupe argued that the police had coerced him into making the confession and that recordings of his voice had been taken without his consent, but the prosecution was not buying it. In their notes, the response to this claim was simple as "we disagree." A psychologist testified that Rupe had schizotypal personality disorder and histrionic personality disorders, histrionic personality disorder in particular being associated with compulsive lying. This claim just didn't hold any water in court either, as the prosecution found that Rupe had been judged to be of sound mind during the investigation. He'd also been in the military, which meant that he likely had previously been trained in resisting coercive interrogation. A polygraph had been used during the interrogation, but despite the defense's objections, polygraphs aren't considered inherently coercive, though their actual reliability in detecting lies is shaky at best. The presence of ammo in Rupe's car and the fact that his blood-stained checkbook was at the scene were evidence enough to put him away. There was also the matter of witness testimony from Monty Jovicic, Skip Grosskopf, and Marlon Townsend, all of which were consistent with each other and with the physical evidence. The trial ended with a guilty verdict, and Rupe was charged with aggravated murder. In the 1980s, when this crime took place, Washington still had the death penalty, which was carried out by hanging, unlike most other states which used the electric chair or lethal injection. This was the case until the statute was removed after a Supreme Court ruling in 2018. And like in a lot of places, murder was a capital offense, especially aggravated murder committed in the course of or while fleeing from a robbery. This was bad news for Mitchell Rupe, to say the least. But his death sentence was overturned, not once, but twice. It happened first in 1984, when the jury decided that some evidence against Rupe was irrelevant and had been brought up in bad faith, namely that he owned multiple guns that he claimed to use for killing varmints. So Mitchell Rupe was spared and lived for another 10 years in prison. In 1994, they tried to give him the death penalty again, and again it was overturned, this time because he was deemed too fat for the gallows. At 300 pounds, Mitchell Rupe was already a pretty big guy when he committed the murders and robbery, but due to serious health problems that had up to that point gone undiagnosed, his weight skyrocketed. By the second time he was on trial, he'd ballooned to over 425 pounds. We say over 425 only because there's a chance we don't know the exact number. 425 was as high as the scale would go. Before we get to why Rupe's immense poundage saved his life, it's worth mentioning that he wasn't the only man whose fat might have saved him from capital punishment. In April of 2000, Michael Anthony Tanzi kidnapped 49-year-old Janet Acosta of Miami-Dade County, Florida. He drove her van to the Florida Keys where he forced her to empty her bank account at an ATM, before he brutally assaulted her and eventually strangled her to death. Tanzi was tried for this horrific crime in 2003, and the jury voted 12-0 for him to get the death penalty. His execution was set for 2025. In a last-ditch effort to stay the execution, Tanzi's lawyers tried to argue that since Tanzi was 380 pounds at the time, he would be too fat for the lethal injection to work properly. Unlike Mitchell Rupe, this argument didn't work for Tanzi, and he was executed on April 8, 2025. And his last meal, if you were wondering, was pork chops, bacon, ice cream, and a candy bar. And if you were thinking, well, 380 and 425 are pretty fat, but these guys don't really seem too heavy to execute fat? Well, there's one more notable case where the accused murderer also happened to be the fattest woman on Earth. Mayra Rosales of La Joya, Texas, confessed to the accidental murder of her nephew, Eliseo, in March 2008 after the boy had died in the hospital from a serious head injury. At the time, Mayra Rosales weighed a whopping 1,036 pounds, and she claimed her nephew had sustained his injury when she had accidentally fallen on top of him. However, Eliseo's autopsy revealed that his injuries were inconsistent with Mayra's story, and they were likely instead inflicted by a blunt object. The investigation uncovered that the real culprit was Jamie Lee Rosales, the sister of Mayra and the mother of Eliseo. Upon being interviewed again, Mayra told the authorities the real story. Her sister had been known to be an abusive and neglectful parent who often hit her kids with a hairbrush when she was upset with him. On the night of his death, she hit Eliseo hard enough to cause severe injuries. She panicked and called 911, and while she and her sister waited for the ambulance, she convinced Mayra to take the fall for her so that she wouldn't lose custody of the kids that she hadn't murdered. After Mayra's revised confession, Jamie Lee fled the country and was on the run for 2.5 years before finally being caught in Veracruz, Mexico. Jamie Lee was sentenced to 15 years but is due to be released in 2025. Meanwhile, Mayra had gastric bypass surgery, lost 800 pounds, but sadly died in 2024 at the age of 43 after health problems caused by her rapid weight loss. By all accounts, she had a quiet, happy life and at least didn't have to take the fall for her sister's crime. Now let's return to Mitchell Rupe's 425-pound escape clause. Why would his weight affect the state's ability to hang this man? Were they worried that the gallows would just collapse as soon as he got up there, or maybe they thought his thick neck would protect his windpipe? The real reason is a lot more gruesome. State Judge Thomas S. Zilli worried that given the weight of Rupe's body, the force of gravity would cause it to rip away from his head completely. And since decapitation falls under cruel and unusual punishment, that simply wouldn't fly. So Rupe was given a stay of execution again, or at least until he was able to shed the extra pounds. He was examined by doctors who found that Rupe wasn't just fat, all of that extra weight was caused by massive fluid buildup caused by his ongoing liver problems. He was taken into emergency surgery to have it drained, and when he'd recovered from that, his weight was back down to a svelte by comparison 275 pounds. After all this rigmarole, Rupe was resentenced in 2000 after a 2-week sentencing hearing that ended with an 11-1 vote in favor of the death penalty, one short of the unanimous decision required to warrant a death sentence in Washington state. His sentence was officially changed to a life imprisonment, which he would live out in Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla. 6 years later, those health problems which saved his life back in 1994 ended up killing him anyway. He passed away from liver disease on February 7, 2006. Reactions to his death were mixed in the community, with most of the victim's family members considering it a kind of karmic retribution after he'd avoided the death penalty so many times. Dorothy Payne, the mother-in-law of Twyla Cameron, told the Seattle Times that she was glad he was dead and that nobody was gonna miss him. Carly Klingbeil, the sister of Candace Hemming, said that she was glad that this dark and painful chapter of her family's history had finally closed. However, Rupe's attorney, Roger Hunko of Port Orchard, told a different story, saying that Rupe was a gentleman who always regretted his actions. Interestingly, as a result of the Rupe case, the state of Washington got rid of hanging and used lethal injection for all of its executions, starting from 1996 until the practice was abolished in 2023. Now go check out what happens when death row execution fails, or watch this instead.